and kind of and the kind of the permit system seems very similar to what happens over in the UK. Just a few little tweak kind of bits within that. So within your permits, you've got to get in touch with your government agency out in the States. And these are kind of the different permit systems that you've got. So your sub permit means that you're kind of almost in training, but you need kind of a mentor to actually make sure that you're doing things right. But also you can actually go banding on your own, but under the supervision or under the knowledge of your mentor, which they refer to as a master permit holder. And then you've got a master permit person, so they're responsible for a site or a number of sites that they can go banding on. Or then you've then got the next level, which is where you've got a bird observatory, and that is kind of the permit system is to do with that observatory. You can see it almost as a group, and the rings and are registered to that group. And then within that, so if you want to be, say, targeting for kind of raptors, then you can apply for a permit for just capturing kind of birds of prey, or if you want kind of passerine or non-passerine birds, then you can apply for a different set of permits for that. And that's very similar here in the UK. So what I'm going to do is go over a few things that happen in the UK. There are some things that happen in the States. So things like the nest boxes and mist netting and canning netting, they kind of happen over in the States. So some of these bits here. So we have a thing called a CES, which is a constant effort site scheme. So that's where you kind of you do 12 visits within the bird breeding season, and what you're trying to do is bring birds, I should try and say band birds, at that same time every couple of weeks from the start of, or from the end of April to the beginning of September. And that's the idea for our season over here in the UK, is to be catching birds that have just arrived or have just started setting up territories and starting to breed, to right the way to the end when you've got dispersal and hopefully like the start of migration and things like that. Cannon netting, that is where you're more likely to put those on kind of shorelines and bits like that. So you're catching kind of waders, and then what you do is you set a net with kind of explosives, and then when the birds cross over that net as they come in with the tide, you then detonate, and then it fires the net over the top of the birds, and then you have a group of people to go and collect the birds out of the nets. And then you've got kind of what they call a RAS. So that's if you're wanting to target a certain particular species of bird, then you can actually put kind of leg rings on those, and that is where you can start to see how often those birds actually return to those areas. Bits like that. And then you've got nest boxes. So I do a little nest box scheme on one of my nature reserves, and I'll talk to you about that in a bit. And then you've got mist netting, which is where you're putting nets up between bushes and hopefully getting the birds that cross between the bushes from bush to bush, and hopefully you'll catch the birds in those nets. So this is one of our kind of standard boxes over here. We call them a tit box. So this is a blue tit that's going in there. And over here in the UK, that you actually need a permit to look inside that box, which I've got, because if you haven't got a permit, then you're breaking one of our Wildlife and Countryside Act laws, which protects all breeding birds with their nests and their chicks and the eggs and things like that. So you have to have a special license to look inside. And what you're doing with this is that you're recording the kind of the start of the nesting season. So you record this down, and then you visit probably once a week, and then you record down how long you spend at the nest site as well, because what you don't want to be doing is spending too much time around that, delaying the parent birds from actually building their nests or tending to young. So you record that they've started the nest, And then what you're doing with this is that you're gathering as much data as you can within those first couple of minutes. So the idea is that when you look at long trends of data, you can then start to work out if birds are breeding earlier or later, or if they're having double broods and bits like that. So the more data that you're getting, the better it is. And then you start recording, then you can potentially open the box up to see the bird sitting there. It's generally a female that does all the nesting or the incubating. So with something like this, I would just record it down and then and close the box slowly and then slowly walk away. There are people that may want to kind of pick the bird up slightly to record the eggs and what she's doing, but from my point, I don't want to be doing things like that. So I just generally just record that she's just sat on the eggs, and then I wait and go back. And then you kind of go back, and then you can start to see that you've now got little baby chicks in there, and then you record the kind of the stage of the chicks. So whether they're naked and blind, or whether they've got feathers starting to come through, and you're recording as much as you can of, like, say, the data. And then eventually the birds get to the chicks get to the stage where you can actually ring them, and you can just see on that left leg it's been fitted with a band on there which has got its own unique ID number on there. And then occasionally you might come across bats, and they will inhabit the box as well. So with bats in the UK, they're all protected species as well. So it means now, like when I know that this bat is in this box, I'm not allowed to check this box again until the end of the bird breeding season, which is usually, or when I go to clear the boxes out in the winter. That's the only time I can actually look back in that box, because by that point the bat will have actually gone and found its normal kind of winter roosting area, rather than in the box through the spring and summer. So moving on to kind of mist netting. So this is one of the sites, and you can just see fine bits here, which is the net. So this particular one is about 40 foot long. So I do have them going up to 60 feet, but then you can actually link them up as well to make them longer. Depends on where you're going to be sighting them through bushes and things like that. And so this is one of my sites where I've generally been catching a bird called a nightingale. I'll come on to that in a minute. But I don't put nets up in all these locations because if you have a look at where you've got near enough number 7, so in this location here between 7 and 1B, and then up to number 9 and walk back, that is about half a mile for me. So it takes a long time. So in terms of for banding birds or mist netting, you leave the nets for about 30 minutes before you go back and collect the birds out of the net. So probably on this site I'll probably work about 4 or 5 nets, depends on what the weather is like. So you'll only be ringing when there's not a lot of breeze or a lot of wind, because what you're not wanting to do is have the birds kind of being bashed about in the bad weather. And then I have a group of people that help me out, and then so I'm just took the job of writing the birds down that were coming through, and then I had other people around me that were taking various measurements, and I'll show you bits in that in a minute. And then you can see some bags that are hanging down, and they've got the birds, so they're all got individual birds in there. So in the winter time I can probably process maybe about 20-30 birds in a couple of hours. And then in the summertime, when I'm kind of ringing from about 4 o'clock in the morning, maybe till about 10 o'clock, I might get anything between 60 and 80 birds through in that session. And that might only be because I've only got a few nets up And it all depends on how many people I've got helping me out. But if it's only me, then I probably will only have probably three or four nets out, because I've just got to make sure that I can get round all of those nets in a timely fashion, and to be able to process the birds and release them back out into the countryside. So, as you will have seen, these are the books that we are, as bird watchers, are used to using. So show you very nice pictures of the birds, and show you the locations of where they, especially these ones here, where they occur in Europe and right the way down into Africa. But in my bird ringing book, this is what I'm used to. So it doesn't have very pretty pictures. It's all very scientific. And because I have dyslexia, and there's a lot of reading here for me, then I highlight the birds that I usually catch. I highlight the important bits of information that I need to in red, so then I can actually, rather than having to read everything, I can actually go straight to the important bits for me about how I can identify that species of bird and know that's what it is, and bits like that. So that's what the red pen is. But yeah, they're very kind of scientific books, these are. This is where I record all my data. So the blue handwriting that you see, that's all brand new birds. And then the ones that are written in red, they are retrapped or recaptured birds. So they've already been fitted with a ring. And then you can see the various bits of data that I capture in there. So I won't worry about the numbers for the ages, but you've got a different number system for ages, and then you've got M for male and F for female, and then you've got kind of brood patches that you're recording. You're recording wing length, so you're recording all this data within like a couple of minutes of holding that bird in your hand. So this is a nightingale. So once you've caught that bird, you want to be making sure that whilst it's in your hands, that you've got enough time to capture as much data as possible. So once you've worked out that what species of bird it is, you then work out kind of the sex, whether it's a male or female. I'll come on to that in a minute. And then the photograph on the left-hand side is where we're taking a wing measurement. And we're now starting to find, with certain species of birds, that they're now having longer wing lengths, and that's because of kind of climate change, and they're having to fly further distances. So all this data now is starting to show, with what we're understanding with climate change and how birds are having to fly further to actually get to kind of breeding grounds or brand new breeding grounds. The picture on the right is where we're taking a measurement of the tail. And like I said to you about breeding, so this is the breastplate of a wren. So what female birds will do in the breeding season is pluck all the breast feathers out from the breastplate, and this is where they will be incubating the eggs. So it's the actual, when they're in the incubation stage, they'll raise the blood vessels up to the surface of the skin, and then it's the actual skin that kind of incubates the eggs rather than the actual feathers, as we may think. But the actual feathers around that brood patch will keep the heat in, so that they can be incubating the eggs. And then this is also categorized as well. You've got different stages of this brood patch as well, which can kind of show you that they're just starting, or that they've got on eggs, or they've got young, or they've actually finished and are now starting to feather back up. So this is kind of also important data as well for you. So this is one of our kind of common kind of birds. We see this an awful lot in the garden, and this is where we can work out whether they are a juvenile bird or whether they're an adult bird. So we can see on the top photographs, so the top left, that has got more yellow and it's not as crisp with the blue. So this is a juvenile blue tit that's kind of hatched that year and is fledged that year. whereas you've got an adult on the top right. And then the other bit is that when we're also looking at is the wings. So you'll have a look at the cover bits of these feathers here. You can see that there's a colour difference between these feathers. So you've got more slatier grey colours rather than a really nice electric blue. Whereas you can compare with the adult birds where it's a similar colour right the way through. And this is one of those kind of diagnostic features of when you're trying to age birds or blue tits. This is a great tit, so it's slightly bigger than a blue tit, and this will take a slightly different size and a band to the blue tit. And with these birds, so you can sex these birds all year round. So with the picture on the left hand side, this is a male, and the black band goes, there's a really thick black band that goes down through the breast, and then the black goes between the legs, whereas the female, it's a bit mottly and it's not as very well pronounced. So so yeah, so you can identify the birds, especially great tits, throughout the whole of the year. And then we're moving into kind of slightly bigger bird. This is a blackbird, so part of your thrush family. And the picture on the left is a juvenile male blackbird. Female is brown, but this is a juvenile, and you can see that he's not replaced a lot of his primary and secondary feathers because they're all still brown. Whereas the picture on the right hand side, this is a full adult, and also you can start to see the coloration of the beak as well, the difference between the left and the right photograph. And then moving on to some of our smaller birds. So these ones start to get a little bit tricky between a willow warbler and a chiffchaff. So these are birds that migrate up from kind of West Africa. And I mentioned about climate change. The chiffchaff now is starting to, probably in the last 10 years or so, probably 15 years, it's now started to kind of overwinter in the UK rather than actually migrating all the way back down to Africa. But when this bird is in the hand, it looks quite similar to each other. So what you're doing is you're now starting to have a look at various diagnostic features, which is where you'd start looking at the wing. And with the willow warbler, what you're doing is that you count along to the 6th primary feather, and as you can see here, it's in a very straight line. Whereas on a chiffchaff, the 6th primary feather, there is what they call a notch, like an indentation, and this is one of the diagnostic features of these particular species of birds. And also that when you start to close the wing up, you have a look at where the 2nd primary feather, which is this one here, and you see where that one kind of lines up within the feathers. So yeah, so these ones are slightly more tricky with the warblers. This is a nightingale. So these will be coming up into the UK anything from April, and then they'll be starting to migrate and go back down to West Africa in the about the late July. They'll start leaving the UK, and then by the August, September, they'll be back down into West Africa. So yeah, so this is one of the, it's a rarer bird in the UK. So with these ones, I have a license to be able to tape lure these out. So I use a male nightingale call to actually attract it out of the bushes, and it makes it think that there's another male in his territory. To make it, so yeah, so that's how I kind of catch these birds. And then with these ones, because they are very brown, so what we're now trying to do to age this one, we're looking at, if you can see that I've circled some very light patches on the coverts, and then And then when you've got the adult, they don't have these little pale patches. So they're quite hard to get your eye in and identify and things like that. And sometimes that you might not actually see um, to see the coloration. And if you're actually not sure, then you kind of put that down in the scoring system is that you're actually not sure, because what you're trying to do with all this is actually get good solid data that is usable for kind of science and bits like that. So yeah, so there's no point kind of guessing with when you're out banding, because what you're trying to do at the end of the day is actually get some really good usable data that improves the science, the knowledge about these species of bird. So this Nightingale, I fitted a satellite tag onto the back of it. So this is called a geolocator, and what this does is it measures light intensity. So it's already kind of preset to the UK, and then the idea is that it measures the angle of the sun, and then it kind of triangulates it and then records the data on that. So you get about one day's worth of data. So it just kind of turns itself on, takes the data reading for that day, and then turns itself off, and then it will do it for the next day. And then what you're relying on is this bird actually making it all the way back to the UK so that you can retrieve the data off it. And when you do get the bird back, this is what kind of happens. So this is the data that it shows you, and you'll see that it doesn't takes a few weeks for the bird to actually leave kind of our shores in the UK, and then right the way down to Senegal and the Gambia, which is this spot here, which is on the 12th of September, it reached the Senegal and the Gambia border to overwinter. And a lot of these birds, we think that when birds migrate for their wintering grounds, once they hit their wintering grounds, we always think that that's where they stay. Well, with this project that I was involved with back in 2012, we actually found, out of the 13 birds that made it back with the tags on it, that 5 of them actually made a second journey for a second winter. And as you can see, that this bird here, that on the 8th of February, it left, and then it landed down in Sierra Leone, so further down into West Africa. So that's the kind of the bottom of the bump of West Africa. And then where it sat there and stayed there until the 22nd of March. And this is where I think this kind of information is kind of mind blowing, because on the 22nd of March, it left Sierra Leone, and then it arrived on the 25th of March, a couple of days later, in southern Spain. So to think that this bird, it's just a bit bigger than, like, it's about same size as your robin or that you have over in the States. But to think that that bird that weighs 20 grams has made that distance. So then it stayed from the 25th of March to the 13th of April, stayed there, and then it flew up into northern France, and then it flew up again from the 18th of April, and then I then caught it back at Grafton Water on the 19th of April. And when you look at that kind of data, it shows that it's done that full flight in about 3 days, 3 or 4 days, and that is about 3,500 miles, something like that, to actually make that journey. So yeah, so this is part of one of the tracking bits that's kind of unlocking migratory routes for us. And if you are lucky enough to catch a bird back, this is the data that, or the information that you can get from it. So I had a nightingale on another one of my nature reserves over in the east of Anglia, that it was originally caught in Katong, which is in the Gambia, and then a few days later we then caught it back on the nature reserve. So as you can see from here, it starts to give you locations, gives you like the duration of how long the bird has had that leg ring on for you. And you can start now to work out kind of longevity of birds. And because a lot of the time we're not sure about how long birds live for, but actually by fitting a ring or a colour ring, we can actually start to have that understanding, because we now know that bird has got it's an individual bird rather than a group type thing. So when you look at both of those the birds that I've just said about with the nightingales, that so the bird from Grafham Water that I caught that went all the way down to Sierra Leone, that's about 4,500 miles, or just short of 4,500 miles, and over 3,500 miles from the other nature reserve to the bird observatory near Senegal. Now we're starting to move into some of the bigger species of birds. So this is an osprey. So with the osprey chicks, we can go up into the nest and collect the birds, and then we fit the colour rings, which are called a Darvik ring, and that one has got it's a colour with letters on it, and then it will still have a metal band on being fitted on the other leg. But then this means that when we're seeing them out in the field, so this one here, we can clearly see that it's got a white leg ring and it's got 03 on the side. So when we've got a database over here in the UK, very similar to what you've got over in Florida, and you can actually enter that ring in, and then that information will then go off to the British Trust for Ornithology, who holds the data, and then they will actually send the information to the person that ringed that bird, and also send you the information about where that bird was found or was originally caught. So you can start to now build up a bigger picture. And also with this type of ringing or banding, that you actually don't need to recapture that bird, because you've already got a fixed kind of ring that you can see on the leg. And then now we're moving into kind of some more satellites. So obviously these ones now are a lot bigger, that you can get a lot more information and data out of them. So with these ones, that you can actually sit at your computer and you can say how long you want that data being collected. So with the ospreys, we'll generally set it so we get the data or the location of the osprey every hour. And then we may download the data probably once every 2 days, something like that, because there's a lot of data to gather. But also that if you wanted to, you could set it to every 10 minutes or every 3 hours, all just from the comfort of your own home. But also with that tracking device, it not only pinpoints the bird, but also that you can see what kind of altitude the bird is flying at, its wings, its speed that it's flying. You can also work out its body temperature, the outside temperature. So you can start with these ones, you can start to get a lot more information. And the more information you get, the better of the understanding that you have of these species of birds. So where you've got the two different colours on here, so the blue route is 1 year, so it's an autumn and a spring migration, and the green is kind of the following year. And what we've now been finding is that they are taking virtually the similar kind of routes year on year. So where you've got some bits where it's kind of ballooned out, so like with the blue line, generally with that, it's because where they've been blown off course by really strong winds. And then what the bird will try and do is actually correct itself to actually get back on its normal flight path. Taking it closer to home to you, so this was one of the ospreys that kind of or that breeds up in Washington, but then overwinters down in Brazil. And this is over 8,000 kilometers away. So this journey is here, Um, and then in their breeding grounds, this is where I think that the technology really starts to open it up, because it's absolutely fascinating. So you've got the spot in the middle which shows where the nest site will be, or where it is commonly been spotted, and then you can see all the little arrows out, and this is where it will be going out to go fishing. So a lot of people think that they'll just have one spot to go fishing in, but they will have actually multiple places. So if the weather's not right, then they'll go and fish somewhere else. But also you've got to think that if you're a fish and something keeps dropping in above you, then you're actually going to dive deeper. Whereas an osprey, they'll dive to a couple of feet. So they're not kind of big divers like some of your diving birds, like your cormorants and bits like that. So they'll be picking fish off almost the surface of the water. So they will have plenty of locations around their nesting site to make sure that they can have plenty of fish to be bringing in for the chicks. A couple of years ago, we had a bit of a story in the UK, because somebody had spotted an osprey in Barbados with a colour ring on it, reported it to kind of the agencies over in America about that they'd spotted an osprey with a blue leg ring on it, gave over the details. They came back and said, no, it's not an American osprey. So then they got in touch with the UK, and then found that it was a bird that was originally caught in Scotland. And what they believe is that the bird caught a lift on a ship, and decided that it would stay on the ship, and then it went all the way to Barbados. Obviously, didn't know that it was going to Barbados, but that's where it ended up over in the Caribbean, and it stayed there for a couple of years. So next year, or should say really this year, will be its third year. So in terms of ospreys, that they'll be starting to think about migrating back to their breeding grounds. So this will be where it'll be quite interesting to find out whether it will either decide to try and make its way back to Scotland, or if it was going to try and make its journey up into like North America and kind of hit kind of its almost the latitude, or the latitude of where it was breeding in Scotland. But yeah, only time will tell whether that will happen or not. I went on holiday to Valencia in Spain, and saw some greater flamingos, which is a bird that my daughter, who is 10 years old, has always wanted to see. So we tried to make sure that we could go and try and find these birds whilst we were on holiday, and we came across a number of greater flamingos, and I noticed that some had got the yellow Darvik rings on their legs. So then when I got home, I found the agency over in Spain to get in touch with and give over the leg rings. And then I was really surprised when the data came back. So this particular bird, it turns out that it's actually 21 years old. And then what I did was that I kind of mapped out it, because with that data that I got from the record of it, it showed me whereabouts in kind of Europe that it had gone. So it had done quite a journey in the 21 years. Just go back, and the bird standing next to this one was also ringed in the same place as this one, but was actually 10 years younger. So quite amazing, really, to think that this bird in the 21 years had been flying around Europe and had gone into kind of North Morocco near Tunisia, and then back, and then it was back in Spain. So as I mentioned about banding, so you can just see the yellow outline. This is this is where I work in the UK, and I have a number of bird banders that operate on some of my sewage treatment works. And these are some of the birds that have been caught on our sewage works and that have been recaptured elsewhere in Europe. So you can see that I've had birds being caught up in kind of northern Russia, and the kind of the middle of Russia, in Germany and Italy, and then so yeah, so it starts to show you kind of, or from my side, how important my sites are at work for birds on a kind of an international scale. And then many years ago, that there was a bird called a curlew, which is photographed here, and a lot of people didn't really know how long these birds kind of live for, but this particular bird had this leg ring on its leg for 29 years and 277 days. So yeah, so quite amazing really. And this is just showing you on the map of where it was originally caught, and then it was caught on one of my sewage treatment works twice. So yeah, so quite amazing really. And then the other day I thought, well, what is the oldest banded bird? So it turns out it's a type of albatross that you can find over your way, over in Hawaii. And it turns out that this particular bird here has been is has had this band on its leg for 68 years. So the reason why I've said 74 is because on the information that I could find is that the gentleman that originally ringed the bird 68 years ago, that he aged the bird as being at least 5 years old. So he could work that out with by the way that she'd molted her wing feathers, and it could age her that way. So I did see that sadly the gentleman did pass away. I think it was last year or the year before, but he was able to go and see this bird again, and recapture the bird. But yeah, so he sadly passed away at the age of 92. So yeah, so I thought that was actually quite amazing, really, that to think that bird, that albatross is that could be 74 years old. And I did see that she's also has got her 40th. She's just laid her 40th egg as well this year. So quite outstanding, really. And then just kind of some memorable bits for me. That this is my office that I work in, and somebody knows that I do bird banding, and they said to me that there was a particular bird in the office that had come through the ceiling vents, and could I actually catch it? So with the help of a couple of work colleagues, I just happened to have some nets in the back of my car and set them up in the office, and I was able to catch that bird and then release it back outside. So yeah, so that was I was the talk of the office for a couple of weeks, and even people that had never spoke to me before, that they seemed to be wanting to talk to me and find out how I was doing bird banding and why I was doing that, and thought it was absolutely fascinating that this is what I was doing, not as part of my job, but I can do it as part of it as well. And then a few years ago, I had the opportunity to meet His late Royal Highness Prince Philip at an event, and I was told that between four of us in this little marquee that I got about 2 minutes of his time to talk to him. That's if he wanted to talk to me, and kind of 15 minutes later, he was trying to be carefully ushered on because he was so captivated about the work that I was doing with nightingales and the tracking, that it was an absolute privilege to speak to him about the work that I was doing. And believe it or not, that yes, I feel like I scrubbed up very well that day, but what he didn't realise is that I was out bird ringing at 3 o'clock also that morning, before actually meeting His Royal Highness. And then as these kind of things happen, that a TV program called Countryfile So this is something that looks at kind of species and wildlife and farming things in the UK. And I got approached to see if I would do some TV filming for them about satellite tagging nightingales. And so that was an absolute privilege, but it was a very long day. So I was up at kind of about 2 o'clock in the morning, and meeting the Springwatch team or the Countryfile team, and then putting nets up and doing that whole filming. So that whole film, even though it was about 6 hours, it was about 6-7 hours that I was with them, that I had about 5 minutes of fame. So coming to a close, really, these are kind of some of the birds that I catch. So some are migratory birds, some are kind of resident, and this is what I feel privileged myself to be able to do this, because I'm fascinated with wildlife, and I always want to know more. And the more that we do things, the more information and the more data and the knowledge that we gain from this is really good. So I do find it an absolute privilege to be able to do this. And kind of coming back over to your shore, that you have got kind of a banding group over in Florida. And these are just some web addresses, and I did notice, Kathy, on one of your front slides, that there was the scrub jay, and that had actually got some leg bands on it. So you could actually report that bird to this. So what you would need to do when you find a bird with a band on it is remember which leg it is actually on, and also the key bit is whereabouts on the leg it is, because with some type of waders, that you'll have the leg bands further up here, and it can either be a closed band like this, or it might be a flag, so a little bit that sticks out the side with a couple of letters on it. And remember the color combinations that it has, and then also remember like the time of when you saw it, and your location, so that the more information that you've got to be able to hand over to your kind of your organization, your government organization over there that holds the data for it. So I just want to say thank you very much, and I'll be handing back to you.
Well, thank you. That was great.
That was very interesting.
Yeah. And we had a few questions. David Simpson, well, he did also point out that the rough was seen today at the Broadmoor unit, but real difficult to see, and you did need a scope. But he was wondering, are the measurements taken when ringing in England the same as those taken when banding in the US?
Sorry, say again. What was the question?
Are the measurements that you take in England when you're ringing the same as those that are taken in the US?
Yeah, so the measurements that we'll be doing here in the UK will be replicated elsewhere. So the idea is that when you're kind of ringing, so what I will also, so with the measurements that I'll do, if it's a more of a migratory species, then I will take a few more measurements off them. So I'll take what you call like a fat score. So where fat is then building up on the bird. So it starts up in the neck area. So you know where we've all got that little clavicle bit, which is the little V bit at the top of the rib cage on our neck. So they start to store fat up there first, and then they start to deposit it elsewhere on the bird. And with that kind of scoring, that you can start to see when birds are actually going to start migrating, because they're now building fat up to make those long distant journeys. So you'll be doing things like that. You'll be taking leg measurements, and so a whole manner of different types of measurements. But yeah, so they are pretty standard across the world, really, those kind of measurements and formulas.
Okay, and Cindy's, let's answer hers last because that's a local one and we'll get that from Deborah. But Deborah wanted to know, in the UK, are the sewage treatment areas open to the public for birding?
They they're not as such really, no. That I mean, obviously we've got gates for the tankers and people, our staff to go through them. So we do have some bird watchers that will watch on the outside of the fences to actually look into the site. I do give certain special permissions for groups to be able to come onto some of our operational sites, but they would have to be wearing kind of fluorescent jackets and things like that because we've got too many kind of bits of machinery driving around, and they we can't be having people in camouflage gear when I've got lorries and that moving around. But on certain special circumstances, we can allow people in, but it needs to be on a permitted system. And then I've got a number of bird ringers that have access to our sites as well, so they will be banding birds, and I get reports through from them as well at the end of the year about what birds they've actually been catching and bits like that. So yeah, so that side of it is also really important to me because I can start to see what birds are using our sites, and I can start either crunching the data myself to see how important our sites are for birds.
Yeah, I think we have noticed here in the US because we do have a lot of the places are open for birding that they're birding hotspots pretty much across the US. So very
Yeah,
important.
I've got one sewage works that actually featured in the top 10 of one of the counties. So a county called Lincolnshire. So yeah, so it featured as one of the top 10 places to go birding in that county, which was quite amazing, really, to think that it was beating some really good nature reserves for bird watching.
Hey. Terry wanted to know, is the black, white, and red bird that when you had your pictures, was that a woodpecker?
It was, yes. So that was a great spotted woodpecker.
Right,
That
spotted.
was. We only have three in the UK. We've got a green woodpecker, and then we've got the great spotted woodpecker, and then we've got a lesser spotted woodpecker. So yeah, so they're the only three that we as a true woodpecker that we have.
Mhm.
So our lesser spotted woodpecker is a bit similar to your photograph that you've got, apart from it doesn't have the red throat
The
on it.
sapsucker picture that I have. Yeah.
But it's quite a small one, so it's a bit bigger. It's trying to think of a bird that would be your size. Do you have like your thrushes? So you know, like your American thrush. It's a bit smaller than that.
Okay. Yeah. Constance also wanted to know she said, what was the dinosaur looking bird in the center of the slide with all the bird pictures, almost reptilian looking with white dots?
Oh, that one is a green woodpecker, but it's a juvenile. So yeah, and you'll see with the woodpecker like you've got in your photograph that they're quite clever of how they hold on to the trees. So you have two forward facing claws and two backward facing claws, and also that I don't know if people know, but the tails are really stiff. They're really firm because they use that tail as an anchor point whilst they can be banging on the tree. But yeah, they're very sharp, those claws, and yeah, and they're especially green woodpeckers. They're really noisy as well.
I noticed that picture too. I was like, ooh, that's an interesting bird. I have a question. Is there anything specific that they're doing? Because I've heard that the nightingales are kind of being challenged. Is there anything that they're doing to help with conservation as far as breeding areas or?
The it's sadly declining in the UK. And with the project that I was involved in, I helped rewrite a habitat management book for it, or a guidebook for it. um, and and it's the issues that we've got with that species of bird, that you've got destruction of its habitat, where we're putting housing estates or roads all through it. You've also got the neglect. So with that nightingale, that it likes thick scrubby habitat, because it nests anything from the ground to about a meter high. So it's quite a low level nesting bird. And and then the other bit, so if it's not dense, then it doesn't nest under that scrubby layer. But then also that we've got a particular type of deer over here, an invasive species of deer called a muntjac deer, which has only been in the country probably less than 100 years, but it browses really low. So, and that is one of the factors with the birds declining as well, because those species of deer don't have a set breeding season, so they will breed literally all year round. And they're solitary as well, so they'll only come together to mate, and then once they finish mating, then he disappears and she will disappear as well. But and then usually, like with once she's given birth, usually within 3 to 4 days she's back in season again, and could be then pregnant again. So she's got a very quick, rapid cycle. So there's a lot of things like that. And then also you've got to think that these birds, with them being migratory, that you've got problems in the other countries as well, with deforestation and kind of illegal netting and illegal catching, because the nightingale has got a beautiful song to it. So there are still people out there catching birds to sell on markets, and because they have got such a beautiful song. So what I was hoping with the research work that we were doing, is using the kind of our local agencies, so what they call the RSPB, so the Royal, so it's about the protection of birds, but they will also have kind of an international arm to them, where they can speak to the other conservation agencies in other countries and actually show kind of where hotspots are within the flyways between the UK and West Africa, and actually use that kind of data to look at trying to protect and have reserves set up for species of birds like the nightingale. Because as soon as you start laying the nightingale data and ospreys and things like swifts, that they all seem to take the same directional routes as well. So the more data and the more information that we're getting, the better it is to look at where we can be trying to be preserving these hotspots and these areas for birds to be migrating through and stopping off for feeding and roosting and bits like that.
Very good. Very, very good. All right. Any other questions? All right. It looks like we're finished. You're probably pretty tired.
I'm all right at the moment.
But thank you so much. It was very fun.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Yeah. Oh, I did not answer Cindy's. How many banders do we have in our area? Deborah, I'm going to let you do that one. I'm sure Mike doesn't know. So
I would guess that there are 10 stations in Florida. That's just kind of a guess. It might be only 5, not that many. It's quite a licensure project to get the license, correct, Mike?
It is, yeah. So like here in the UK, that I mean, I started banding in 2008. I found a trainer, so I had to go out and be with him all the time. And then I think it was in 2011 that, because over here in the UK, to progress into the next bit, you've got to prove that you can hold the birds all right, and that you can process the birds as well, and then you'll go and get assessed by somebody that is completely different. to your trainer, because then there's no bias with it. And then they will make sure that you've got the right skills. And then once they're happy with you, then they sign a piece of paperwork off. You then send it off to your organization, and then you then get onto the next permit. So like with that, I was able to go and do bird ringing banding on my own, but everything was, so all my nets and all my rings or the bands were all licensed to my trainer, because if anything happened, if I did things wrong, he would get into trouble as well with that. And then once I'd done kind of all those, and I felt like I was ready to say be fully fledged and be going out on my own, then I then apply for my next license to be able to do that by myself fully, and I can buy rings on my own, I can buy nets and things like that. So then I can then, if I've got the time, which I haven't at the moment, but I can try for a training permit. So then I can have trainees to come out, and I can then train them how to catch birds, how to identify and age, and which is something that I want to do. But at the moment, with having a young family, that I can't commit to that side of it. But that's the process, and it seems like that's what the process is out in the States.
Yeah, we have one very local to us at Lake Lotus Park that grew out of one at Wekiwa Springs State Park. And it's very good for young people. They love to let them hold the bird when they let it go. And you know, just they make it friendly.
Yeah, I have a children's group not far from me, and before COVID, at least twice a year, I used to be invited over to their Saturday meetings, their wildlife meetings, and go and set up some nets and catch some birds for them. And yeah, it didn't really matter to them whether it was a really common bird or anything like that, but to actually see the bird right up really close, and it would be no pressure from my side that if they wanted to hold the bird and let it go, either out of the hand or out of the little weighing pot that we'd weighed them in, then they could do that. If they didn't want to do that, then that was fine. But yeah, the problem was sometimes was actually making sure I'd got enough birds to be able to try and catch. So yeah, I'd be putting feeders up and having little feeding stations. So for weeks preparing for this event, that I would have everything out, because, and then what they used to say was that it was a really well turned out event, that the best that they'd ever had for kids coming out to it. So there was always a pressure on to try and catch at least 20 birds as a minimum for the children. So
pertinent to Cindy's question, and the fact that there's so few banding stations anywhere, isn't it kind of rare that you recapture a bird from another, or that one of your birds is recaptured elsewhere?
Yeah, I don't get a lot of recaptures myself, and I think I get my birds back on my sites, but you've got to, it's a happy medium really, because you're wanting to catch enough birds so that people can potentially catch them elsewhere, but it's also making sure that there's other banders out there in those locations to be able to catch those birds. So there are some birds that, so like with the nightingale that I showed you, that I think I had that on site for at least 3-4 years, and that was coming back to the same location each time. And then I'll have some warblers that I'll catch that I've been catching for at least 4 years on site. So that, and where I showed you with all those numbers of the net rides, that's also enabling me to track where birds are actually moving to and from on the site, but also that if I start to see a dip in bird populations, then I might start to think, right, what's the management of that part of the site like, and then start to actually look at why birds are dropping in those particular parts of the site, and then start pulling together a plan to actually rectify that. So it's enabling me to help with another organisation to help manage those sites better, because we've got a better understanding of what birds are frequenting between those.
Very good.
But it is quite exciting when you do get a bird back with a band on it and something that's, or it's got a continental band on there. It's because then your mind just then races to wonder where it's actually been, and then you feel impatient because you really want that data back, and you've got to wait a couple of weeks for the person the other end to send it back over to you. But yeah, it's quite exciting when you've caught a bird with a band from somewhere else.
Good work.
Thank you so much. Sorry, losing my voice.
All right, I guess we'll let everybody go.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. That was
No,
great.
thank you.
Thanks again, Mike.
Get
You
some
have a
rest.
good evening.
Night,
Stay
everybody.
warm. Yes.
Stay
Night,
warm.
everybody.